Hi there, I'm Jonathan Warner. I'm one of the 5 ambassadors for the MLTI 2.0 program, and really glad you could join me today to talk about digital privacy and security and how that works, especially in the context of the Common Sense Education curriculum with its pretty amazing resources for classrooms and teachers. As you'll see, the Common Sense curriculum is set up to be student-facing, meaning that it's all designed in advance for you to be able to implement immediately with a range of options for how long you want to spend on an individual lesson. In particular, this one focuses on the area of passwords and sharing information, photo locations, and things that focus on how a student would be able to learn the skills and limit their, I guess I'd say, exposure while maximizing the benefits of connecting with others. And this is part of a 3-part mission for the ambassadors. As you may know, if you've seen some of these other videos, this one focuses on the first of those gears, digital citizenship. And if you look on the bottom there, internet safety and security, that is definitely where we're focused today. There are 6 areas of study for the Common Sense Education curriculum, and today's is the first row there, the second one. 2 weeks ago, on the 9th of March, we looked at news and media literacy as a short focus to introduce the Common Sense Media curriculum, working with my colleague, Holly Graffam. And then second week, I worked with another ambassador, Kate, who helped me take a look at media balance and well-being for the subject of that. And you can go back and take a look at either of those videos. But as I said, today's focus on privacy and security. We'll take a look at this common sense sort of mantra, which is we care about everyone's privacy. And you'll notice throughout that the Common Sense Education content is very positive in its focus, not fear, but on really the concept of what do we gain by being connected, but also by being safely connected. So the question, or the essential question that they link to that concept, is how can I keep my private data safe and secure? And I'll read this just because I think it's really helpful. It's easy to default to scary rhetoric about the dangers of Big Brother and stranger danger. However, a balanced approach looks at both the rewards and risks of sharing information online with others. Students will learn concrete strategies for safe, appropriate digital interactions so they can minimize the risks of online sharing and take advantage of the rewards. And Common Sense Media has devoted an incredible amount of resources to this curriculum, and there is no way you could replicate everything they've provided. So I really strongly urge you to at least start there with your lesson designs, thinking through the same formats and the same sort of frameworks that they offer, even if you don't end up sticking directly to their curriculum. So as I said, the goal here is to stay away from the fear factor, right? We don't want to think about this as, bringing in the individuals who are going to scare the heck out of the kids, or showing them terrible examples of things that will happen to them if they are, misbehaving or not paying close attention to their digital presence, and instead to really think about what comes out of that as a benefit, and highlighting some of those amazing opportunities, as they say, when students have a chance to connect with each other. So in Cape Elizabeth, where I was working prior to working for the Department of Education, we have a Spanish language teacher who connects every year with a program in Latin America, and she teaches with the teacher there a lesson on designing monsters, ironically. And as they do that, the American students work with their counterparts in 1-to-1 and 2-to-2 sessions, where they develop a kind of storyline for these monsters and descriptions for them. And the classes are conducted half in Spanish and then half in English, so that both are benefiting from the other's expertise. And it's a perfect example of the kind of thing you would never be able to do without internet connection, without digital resources that are provided by being able to access things all around the globe, but which require some thought on the part of Senora Dana, the teacher, to make sure that that's being done in a way that's appropriate. So that's where common sense education will really focus a lot of its energy. Another way to look at this is to think about it as the 9 Ps of digital citizenship. And you can find this in a bunch of different places based on the work of Vicki Davis, but I chose the one that came from netref.com, which looks at security for passwords, privacy, and personal information, thinking really carefully about photography, property, and permissions, and then what needs to be done for protection, professionalism, and permanence. And by that last one, they mean not your digital footprint, which could eventually, as the term implies, wash away, but instead a digital tattoo, something we'll talk about next week, something that is not able to be erased and which really has that kind of long-term impact, talking about things like web archives that keep information even if you've taken it down, or of course if it's been shared with someone else, that it's now resident on their device. But you'll notice that none of this is from the perspective of frightening people. It's just from the perspective of saying these are areas of focus. These 9 Ps are things we need to think about. So that same infographic from NetRef also suggests a 5-step process to think about how to share this with students. So this is not a common sense education resource, but it works really nicely with the common sense concept. So NetRef suggests you begin with an introduction where you're looking at some of the questions like passwords and helping them develop rules around ones that would be very difficult to break or crack. And there's a terrific lesson on that embedded into the common sense education curriculum. Once you've introduced it, building on that with something like a truth or fiction exercise, where you have 3 examples of false news and 2 of true, and then how do you help people make those distinctions between them. Then the third piece, which is engaging them in the process of developing those. So once they've done some of those, what NetRef calls bell ringers, seeing if they can create something that would replicate the exercise you guys have done or you have created as teachers, and they now become the educators. And that, of course, really solidifies their understanding and really makes it exciting to find situations that might work well for those circumstances, those truth fiction kind of news reports. Step 4 that they suggest, and this is also from Vicki Davis's work, is the deep dive. So jigsaw project, where they're thinking about questions that relate to real life and where they're going back and forth between areas of focus that are at first sort of hypothetical, like the lessons are going to give them strategies, but then how would those be employed in real life? And we'll talk more about that in just a second. And then finally, teaching students how to react when they encounter suspicious or inappropriate online activity. So what do you do in that moment? And this is where the negative piece is probably most appropriate, to say there are some really great tools, and you see those listed there, which are wonderful, to think about how to capture that information so it can be shared. I've had to do this on more than one occasion as a tech integrator, and it's really upsetting, but it makes it so much easier down the road to be able to figure out what happened and track down the source. So those 5 steps in conjunction with the 9 Ps can be a really terrific way to look at these. And then if you want to think about it from sort of the process point, how is it going to look in your classroom? Davis suggests that we look at this first as a skill similar to reading or swimming. And she points out that we treat digital citizenship like, here's the things you need to know about it, now go do it. And we would never do that with reading. We would never do that with swimming. Of course, we would incorporate the practice into the teaching. And so the question she raises is, why do we not do that? And how might we going forward? So she suggests that truth or fiction exercise, as I said, making students into the teachers, and then creating collaborative learning opportunities where we think about ways that either with another class, as I suggested in this situation with the Latin American classroom, can you find someone with whom your students connect that offers an opportunity both to benefit from the connection and practice the skills necessary to be able to do so safely. The illustration on the right, same 9 Ps, it just is the version that was published in Edutopia that I wanted to share as another option for a visual if that's something that appeals to you. And then finally, this particular article that she wrote for Edutopia sort of asked the question generally, is it helpful to think about this discussion dropping the word digital and just talking about citizens and citizenship, in that all of these skills, all of this awareness is important for anyone working in the real world, just as it is in the digital world. And if that's the case, then can we potentially teach something more along the lines of how to go about, being a citizen of America and over the world versus really focusing in on just the concept of your behavior online. And some people have thought about that as blurring the distinction between your online and your analog life, which I really like too, that you should represent yourself online as who you are in real life and vice versa. Okay, so Common Sense also offers some incredibly helpful and deeply researched publications. And I was just going to give you a couple samples from their publication list. The first is their 2021 State of Kids Privacy Report, which looks at all the different ways that security issues have arisen. And if you have questions about a particular app or a particular website, particular fact pattern or circumstances, it's almost like a dictionary or encyclopedia of situations where privacy issues have been raised and where we need to think about how we might address these in a more global way. For example, with school board policy or with conversations between administrators in the same building, in the same district, but in different buildings about how things will be handled consistently, and what your IUPs look like, your internet use policies that would reflect some of the issues that have arisen, of course, exacerbated by the pandemic. A second one is the privacy of streaming apps and devices. Really great for conversations with families and parents, especially, but also with kids about things that are shared and used by those companies when you aren't necessarily realizing that that's the case. Then the State of EdTech Privacy Report from 2019, which looked specifically at educational technology, which is geared towards kids in schools and how they have been or have not been successful in protecting student privacy. And then finally, really kind of a primer for this issue, if it's one that's helpful to you, the Privacy Risks and Harm report, which looks at all the different ways that Common Sense has become aware that privacy issues are raised. So especially as you're looking for some of those real world situations that you might teach as examples, this Privacy Risks and Harms report is really helpful. So let's dive into the website and take a look at how they have things set up. It's going to just take me a second here to switch screens. There we go. So if you notice the way the digital citizenship curriculum is set up at commonsense.org, if you go to digital citizenship, I've gone into the curriculum here. So as they look at the lesson plans in particular, you can jump in right there. You get to this page. And as I said, there's 6 areas here of focus. We're going to use these as a filter and today look at privacy and security. So this is going to eliminate the 5 other areas and only give us lessons for this particular focus. We see a restatement of that kind of mantra about we care about everyone's privacy. And then you'll notice they go down by grade level all the way through. And this is the case for every subject matter if you haven't seen that. One of the ways I like to use this is if I click on multiple grades. So my school is a 5, 6, 7, 8 middle school. I apply that filter and now I'm only getting those grades information. And we can talk for a second about sort of how these are set up. Specifically, the format for each of them is almost identical. And if we use that example of the truth fiction exercise, here's Common Sense Education's version of this called You Won't Believe This. And this format is the same as I said for each of these. So we have learning objectives on the top. We have key vocabulary, a statement about what you're going to need from lesson slides, which you can customize and are already set up to work with this lesson plan. There are handouts, both a student-facing and a teacher version. And then they've integrated the lesson quizzes, and this is the case for all the lessons, into Google Classroom. So if you go to the quiz, there are 5 questions typically, and it is easy to just click to assign it through Google Classroom after you finish the lesson, and can also be copied and pasted into a different format if you'd rather. If you're going to print it out, for example, or if you have a different method of distributing links or quizzes to your students. But I really like that they've integrated it so seamlessly with Google Classroom, and the slides integrate with Google Slides. All the lessons are set up with this warm-up, an analyze phase, an evaluation phase, and then a wrap-up. They also allow you in many cases to deal with a short version of this. So there will be right above this 15-minute or a 20-minute version if there's an issue that you want to raise, but you don't have time to devote a full period to it. If you take a look at the specific activities that are within each of these, let's take a look at the avoiding clickbait evaluation section. We go in there, it's going to give us literally a script if you'd like to read that and tell you where it lines up with the slides. So if you've started in the middle of the lesson or you have to break off, these remind me a little bit of the instructions you have to give for standardized testing. I mean, they're that specific and that kind of spelled out for you. As I said, they've done an amazing job at Common Sense Education of giving you an opportunity to enter into this conversation, whether or not you feel really comfortable with it or it's not something you've really addressed before. And then as you work your way down, you'll see that they give you suggestions about sort of how to discuss it, how to set up the questions. For example, allowing students in pairs for a minute to decide and invite students to share out. So they're giving you literally like the classroom activity that goes along with it. And if you'd rather, you can print this out and save it as a PDF if that's an easier way for you to approach it. Each of the lessons also has this family engagement resources side and allows you to send home work for the family relating to your conversation. And of course, this kind of wraparound approach, as opposed to trying to do this on your own, is probably the single most important way that you can get these messages across in a way that really is going to benefit the kids most thoroughly. For us at Cape Elizabeth, we found that some of the conversations that take place around family nights, family evenings that we've done have been incredibly helpful in informing next steps for curriculum, but also in really feeling like parents are engaging in a process that goes away from kind of the feeling around in the dark, what am I supposed to do about this, the anxiety that produces in parents, and gives them a real focus that they know is also being reflected in the school. So I can't recommend highly enough doing that. I mentioned earlier, Kate Myers, my colleague at Department of Education, and her homeschool is Mount Desert Island. And she and I are developing resources for that district that are going to include family engagement conversations. And that's very intentional on the part of the district to make sure that that's a wraparound experience where the kids are really getting that kind of consistent information across the board. So take a look at just one other lesson here. We'll go up to the 8th grade level. These are also really beautifully set up to match the appropriate content for the age group. So as you get into sophomore, junior, senior year of high school, the lessons are totally geared towards real world situations that those kids would face, as distinct, we hope, from those of high school students, middle school students. This being aware of what you share, the 8th grade lesson, as you'll see, is set up almost identically: learning objectives, key vocabulary, classroom resources, take-home resources, and the lesson plan. I just thought I'd show you one set of slides to show you how those work. If you open them up, they all have this kind of format. They look very similar to one another and begin with this essential question, as I said. And then as you work your way down, the learning objectives being apparent to the kids, apparent to them, can be a really helpful focal point to come back, just like it might be in an ELA or a math conversation, and really making explicit what you intend. It's not just an opportunity to talk about it, but really with some skills you're going to be developing. Frequently, there's either a kind of visual that you work from or a video. And in this case, it's a visual-based one. But that'll be early on in the slides and also linked on the right-hand side if it is a video on that last page that we were looking at. They're going to give you some definitions, some examples from the real world, as I said. And then as you work your way down through, they're giving you as I said, kind of the script to work from and giving you these really specific things you can do. Turning off cookies in your browser settings, reviewing apps privacy settings. So you have a kind of activity that's a piece of it. They're really, as we talked about the practice piece of this, they're literally sitting in your classroom, increasing their privacy settings and giving them opportunity to take that same information home. I've had this conversation with kids repeatedly about notifications as an example. So not in the privacy context, but in the invasive quality that notifications can have of sort of insidiously entering, all hours of the day, when instead you might benefit from turning those notifications off and just figuring out a time you're going to look at your phone every couple of hours instead of giving it the control. So it's that kind of real world immediate impact that I really like about these. And the kids walk out having done something to improve their privacy and with a kind of skill set and knowledge base that they can apply elsewhere. So that gives you that sense. And of course, those can also be assigned through Google Classroom. And if you like, they encourage you to make a copy and work from the copy to customize it in any way that makes sense for you. All of the materials here are intentionally open for reuse, modification in any way you'd like. And they really welcome you to make them applicable and most relevant to your students in your settings. So I hope you'll reach out to me if you have questions about any of this. It's an area that I feel very passionately about and really want to make sure people are having on their radar screens as a subject of conversation with their kids. I feel like it's something that we don't necessarily think about as being worthy of school time or focus on the part of a classroom. And yet, because so much of our information is are derived from digital sources at this point, if we're not doing it, I refer to it as the good luck theory of teaching this stuff. Like go out in the world and good luck with that. I hope it goes well for you. We would never do that in any other areas. I gave the example earlier of swimming or English, ELA instruction. That's not a model that we use as educators, of course. But why do we find ourselves defaulting to this situation where it's so easy to utilize resources that are already out there and put in place practices in our schools that match up with the lessons that we're providing and that really make a consistent fabric of the message about what's important. And I feel like Common Sense does such a nice job of digesting that into these 6 parts and by grade level, really giving you what you need to have these conversations without being too intrusive in terms of too much time spent on them, but enough that you're really getting them going. One team that I'm aware of is working to do all 6 areas by distributing them between subject areas. So one conversation is happening in ELA, one in a health class, one in the math class, social studies, world language, and science. And I think that's a great model to consider. Again, along the lines of the consistency of the message, giving all those teachers access and responsibility, ownership for the same information, in that case is made for a wonderful kind of seamless message for that 7th grade team. So digital privacy and security, again, feel free to reach out. It's jonathan.werner@maine.gov. I'd love to talk further about this. Happy to bring programming directly to your schools if that's helpful. And also to help you develop ways that you could integrate this information into your own study and make it relevant to the subject matter at the same time that you're teaching the skill set. Thanks for joining me tonight, and I will look forward to our next session. I'm doing these every Wednesday at 3 p.m. And our next session will focus on the next area of Common Sense media education, which is relationships and, digital footprint and identity. Thanks.